You know every time we speak, it's no apologies. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, presenting industry insiders, brought by Bill Murray. He help you in a real hurry. From ownership to healthcare, he an advocate, teaching you how to buy and sell practices. From CPAs to attorneys, all guests, here to help you with your goals. You never know who's on next. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory. Let's go!
Let's go! Welcome, everyone, to Industry Insiders. We are bringing you people, companies, and professionals that can help you, the practice owner, the dentist, the veterinarian, the medical doctor, the physician that owns their businesses, help you get better at ownership, to help you, whether you are in an exit mode where you're thinking about retiring, whether you are in scaling mode where you're thinking about adding additional locations or expanding your footprint of your current facility, or you are an associate today that's starting to have those ideas around practice ownership and what that would mean for you. Industry Insiders is bringing you phenomenal people and great companies that can help you accomplish your goals. Today's guest, which we'll bring on in a second, we're very happy to have him on to talk about something that is very vital to a business owner. But I think once they kind of establish themselves and get into their space, they forget about how meaningful it is to the business. So we've got someone who specializes in commercial real estate, specifically helping people find space to start their practices or help negotiate leases as those leases kind of move on in your career. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Ken Jorgenson from CARR. Come on in, Ken. Great to see you, sir. Great to see you, sir.
You too, Bill. How are you?
I'm excellent. You're down in the Nashville area now, so you've got a little bit warmer weather. It's sweater weather here in Boston, so we made the change about 2 weeks ago, and it's a great day here in Boston. But very happy to have you on and to talk about your journey and to learn more about what CARR does for healthcare business owners. So happy to have you on today, and it's going to be a great discussion.
Yeah, we're not in sweater weather here. We're in quarter zip weather, but I was in Florida last week, and they're still in like polo weather. So I don't know who has it best. Yeah,
like we were talking earlier, I think when it gets to March around here, I'm very jealous of all the people down in the Southeast. So happy to start it off. So again, just wanted to thank you for joining us today. Can you talk to us a little bit about, tell the listeners your journey and what CARR has meant to you in your career, and talk to me about how CARR and your team help support practice owners today.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for the opportunity. Excited. Been looking forward to this for the last couple of weeks. So I got involved. I got connected to Colin CARR. He's our founder. He started this journey about 15 years ago. Colin worked for one of the big commercial real estate firms, like 98% of the other commercial brokers in the country. He was representing both parties, so landlords and tenants, and also buyers and sellers. And so he would have his name on the side of a building for lease, a retail center, shopping center, a professional park, and doctors, dentists, healthcare providers would call him. And when he would go to his client, the landlord, they would always say, hey, put him here when everybody else in the building was here, right? So they were always paying a higher premium. And Colin was like, what's going on? Why are we always charging these dentists for more than the other tenants in the building? And the answer was always, well, healthcare providers can afford it. They make good money, they can afford it. And so he was like, they're being taken advantage of. There's a major underserved market here. And so about 15 years ago, he stepped out. He and his wife were like, okay, we're going to kind of launch this thing and see if this could actually work. And within a couple months, he had so much activity and buzz. And I think you were around during that time too with some of that activity. And so anyway, once he stepped out, I mean, within a month or two, he had hired a second, and a few months later, a third. And it just kind of blew up over all around the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, which is where our home office is. And Yep. I got connected up. That was the first 5 years. It was just Colin and a couple of agents in Colorado. And then we started having national partners saying, "Hey, it's great that you can help our dentists in Denver and Colorado Springs and Fort Collins, but we have clients in Miami and Boston and Massachusetts and in Maine or California, and so nobody else does really what you do at that kind of at that level or with that approach. And so why don't you go national?" So he had some of those conversations. That's when I came on about 10 years ago. And we started branching out and going coast to coast. So fast forward, we are now in all 50 states. We've got about 160 agents around the country, and all we do is help the dentist and the healthcare provider with their space search, their lease negotiation, their purchase negotiation, due diligence, anything related to the real estate piece. CARR agents will step in and help, but we only represent that one side of the negotiation table, never the landlord side, never the listing side. So we kind of try to remove all those conflicts of interest.
Very unique. So what I really loved about learning about CARR in the beginning, when I had first met Colin and you those years ago back in the Denver market, was that you were very specific to buyer representation, so tenant representation, right? So you weren't listing buildings. You were really truly going in there as an advocate for the doctor that was looking for space. And, the real estate market, you've got, just like everything else, like you've got really, really good people in it. You've got some people that don't really know what they're doing. So to have someone that was solely focused on buyer representation, tenant representation, was a huge benefit. And then adding in your knowledge and your industry specific knowledge about healthcare practices. So I know you guys were heavy dental, but I know you've certainly done a lot of veterinary buildings now, physician owned buildings, ophthalmology, like everything at that point. You've got these specialized people in every market, and you do cover the whole country. I mean, to see where it's grown from where it started 15 years ago to where it is today has just been phenomenal to watch, and you guys do a really great job. So can you talk a little bit about the benefit of like that buyer representation, tenant representation only? Like, what does that mean if I'm a dentist, like going to go look for space? Why would I talk to CARR versus my local real estate agent?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there are, so typically what happens, and again, what was happening with Colin back in the day, typically a dentist, a veterinarian, an optometrist, they're going to drive around on the weekends and they're going to be looking at properties and thinking, hey, this space looks good, this shopping center looks good, I'm going to call the number on the side of the building, not realizing that listing, that number that they're calling, that person, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the owner of the building, the shopping center landlord. And so there is a major conflict of interest if you are calling and getting representation, getting advice, getting counsel from the person that represents the landlord. I mean, you would never go into a court case and have the opposing party's attorney represent you. Obviously, that's not going to give you a fair shake. And so,
Sure.
in the same way, there are tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, on the table during these negotiations. And so doctors typically, when they go out there and they're calling, everything you say on that first phone call can and will be used against you during the negotiation. And so you really want to just make sure that you've got your strategy in place where you are going to maximize every opportunity during that negotiation. And so there are a couple of stages. One, you definitely don't want to do the deal on your own. You don't want to DIY this negotiation.
Totally.
And then the second opportunity would be, okay, working with a real estate broker. Well, that's better than the first, but a real estate broker, again, typically is going to have listings or they're going to have other relationships in the market. So it's best to work and look at working with a firm that has no conflicts of interest. They are focused solely on the tenant or the buyer because they don't care about the relationship with the landlord. They're not trying to chase that next listing because you're not going to get the highest concessions, the lowest lease rates, the representation that you typically would get if you had somebody that was just an advocate for you on your team. So that's kind of where CARR came in.
What you said there that I'm going to make sure our listeners understand is this is not a do-it-yourself moment, right? You can leave hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table in paying too high of a rent, not getting concessions up front, not getting if you're walking in and having that first conversation without someone like yourselves representing them, like you said, like you can really make some missteps just in that first phone call inquiring about the building. Because I think, and I think we see this, like if you're a physician owner, if you're a dentist or a veterinarian or a medical doctor that is trying to lease a space, you are a prime client for those buildings typically, right? Veterinarians sometimes have to get past the dogs and cats and the noise. But once they get past that, they understand like these are tenants that are going to be here for 15 or 20 years, that are going to be successful, that will pay their rent on time. But having that first conversation can really be dramatic, and you can make some big missteps if you aren't staging that the right way. So can you talk a little bit about what CARR does to kind of stage that conversation? So when you have that first intake call with a client, what does that look and feel like?
Yeah, and that's honestly, I was talking with a provider just a couple weeks ago at an event, and she was like, I just found out about you like 2 weeks too late. And I had already reached out to the shopping center and this and that, whatever. But he's a really nice guy. And I'm like, I'm sure he is, because he knows that you are, like you just said, a very desirable tenant. And we actually, the healthcare tenants are actually portfolio stabilizers for most of these landlord large shopping center REITs, because think through COVID. I mean, the veterinarian offices, dental offices, they didn't shut down. Healthcare was very stable when most of the other tenant mixes were pretty shaky, and so landlords will stretch further. They do want to fight for the business more than a typical tenant does, but the playing field really needs to be leveled, and we need to make sure that the tenant, our client, the doctor, the dentist, the veterinarian, is in the power position of that negotiation. And so, to your question, the best way to do that is not to shotgun and pick up the phone on the weekend and call listing brokers and look through LoopNet and just do one property at a time. Our strategy is completely built on what we call posture or leverage. We want to make sure that that you have the most options. It's like when you're buying a car. If you go in and you fall in love with this one car, and the sales guy sees how much you love it and knows that you are not willing to walk away without that car, they know that they have you. And the landlord is the exact same way. So we go in with a business mindset. We're very data driven. So we run a lot of demographic analysis, competition mapping, insurance mapping, patient-based heat mapping, traffic analysis. We try to get a good feel for the vision that you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to do with your practice? Where do you want to be? What patients are you trying to serve? Once we have that, then we take a look at the market and we go through CoStar and CityFeed, LoopNet, Showcase, all the different commercial MLS systems. We drive the market. Our agents are local experts, so they know all the developers and listing agents, and they reach out to really try to uncover every opportunity, turn over every stone possible. And then we always like touring as many as we can, like 6, 7, 8 properties at a time. We don't want to. Commercial is not like residential, where when my wife and I were buying a house, you're
not going to an open house, right? You're not. Yeah, exactly.
And when my wife and I were buying a house, we put in our parameters, and like every 2 days there were like 3 more homes. And commercial is just very different. It doesn't work like that. There's 50 options in a market, and then you put in your space requirements, and there's 45, and then you put in the zoning requirements, and now there's 32, and then you put in the parking needs, and there's 17, and then you put in, well, I don't want to be next to a bar and a hookah lounge, and so now we're down to 8 or 6, 7 or whatever. And so what we like to do is we like to tour with the client those 5, 6, 7, 8 properties. Not that you love all of them, but that you say, hey, Ken, hey,
Carl. Really targeted. That's right. Really targeted. That's right.
Exactly. And hey, I like these 2 or 3 properties. And so we always try to negotiate simultaneously with a few, so that you can see what the market is bearing and what the landlords are offering. And quite often, many times, the client will say, Ken, I really just like this one, but I know you're telling me I have to throw in number 2 and 3, so here are a couple of other throw-in options. We start to look at the numbers. We put a full lease comparison together. You see apples to apples, what they're offering for lease rates, escalations, tenant improvement allowance, build-out time, free rent, all the different things that we negotiate. and then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second, option B looks way better now. And so you really want to, whoever has most options wins. And so we
Yeah.
try to make sure that we put our client in the best position possible, let them, drive the train here, but make sure that they're looking at the whole market, just not one property at a time.
Great. And then, what I want to make sure our listeners understand is that we're not saying don't don't look at properties online. We're not saying don't have an idea where you want to be or what town or what county, right? It's okay to go on LoopNet and look at those things. Just don't reach out and start a conversation that you're not prepared for, right? Because that rent is a very, very large fixed cost in your business that sometimes, if done the wrong way, can be really dramatically not in your favor as an owner. And once you sign that lease, you are in that space. That is it. That's great. And then, so can you talk a little bit about, I know that you guys have, you've got all these agents across the country, and they have a great network too. So you're networking with the equipment companies and contractors. Like, there's this whole ecosystem of people that are brought in once the lease is kind of done and you kind of know, all right, well, we've got a space that we really like. You guys have this great network of people that you're working with to help satisfy all the other things that need to go into that space. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And so the whole concept of assembling the right team or the best team is, I mean, a practice, and you've seen it. You've worked with hundreds and hundreds of practices over your career, and the practices that succeed have a solid team of advisors around them, and the practices that struggle are typically the ones that try to DIY it. Don't know, they may be going through decades of schooling and education and all that kind of stuff, but you don't know what you don't know. I'm not even an expert in residential real estate, and I have my license. I'm going to still use an agent to help me. And so having the right team of advisors is crucial. So each of our local agents in the market, they have relationships with the top dental, veterinary, medical, healthcare, CPAs, and attorneys. You're going to need help with your entity creation. You're going to need help with the lease review, the legal side. Most clients are like, it just comes down to rate and term. They're looking at LoopNet on the weekend. They're surfing around the internet.
Sure.
They're like, just tell me the rate. Just tell me the rate. And it's like, well, wait a second. This is usually the second highest fixed expense in your practice. And if a lease only came down to rate and term, it wouldn't be 75 pages long. So you need a set of legal eyes reading that lease and looking at the clauses and looking at the language and making sure that it's as favorable to you as possible, and it protects you, and you've got the outs you need when you're ready to sell or to vacate, or the lease is up or whatever. And so you're going to want an attorney, you're going to want a CPA, a lot of times you may need help credentialing, you're going to need equipment help or merchandise help. There might be, obviously you're going to need marketing help. And so rather than going out and just Googling and trying to figure out what's coming up in the algorithm, our team is able, and obviously we're connected up with you, and so it's a small, when you get into veterinary, dental, medical, I mean, these are typically small worlds that do the majority of the startups or relocations, expansions. And so you want to work with people who are not cutting their teeth on your practice, but they've done it 10, 20, 50, 100 times before.
You guys do a really, my experience with CARR is that you do a very good job of making sure that things are staged the right way and bringing in the right partners at the right times. Because the other mistake that a lot of practitioners make that open up offices is they sign the lease a little too early. They haven't done all of the other things to make sure that they're ready to start construction, to choose the right equipment, to do a design, to make sure that office can be designed for what they need. So I think you guys also do a really good job of understanding where in the process someone should be and what should have already happened before that lease is signed. I think you guys do a really good job of staging that with all of the partners that you work with.
Well, and timing is really important because, like you said, I mean, we've looked at I was at a physical therapy event actually up in DC like a month or two ago, and one of the guys came up to me and he was like, so I found the space. Listing agent was saying that there's 4 other people looking, and we got to go if you want this. I signed the lease, and what I didn't realize is that permitting in my area was going to take 3 or 4 months. And then the construction and the design. And he was like, I'm paying rent right now on a space that I don't know that I'm going to be in until middle of 2025. And again, this was in like September, October. And I'm like, man, that's a horrible position to be in as a startup where you want to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. So timing again is crucial, and knowing like, hey, on that first tour, when we're driving around with the client, we're going to kind of walk through the entire process. And hey, at this point, you need to be bringing in an insurance person and an architect and a designer and obviously you're going to need your financing lined up and X, Y, Z. You want to make sure that those conversations are happening because you're probably going to interview a few and do your due diligence. And so you don't want to be getting to the point where you're ready to sign a lease and you haven't even looked at potential layouts or how am I going to finance this thing, or what is that, so timing is very crucial to the make or break of a practice.
Sure. And obviously I have a lending background from my previous life, and you also want to make sure that you have enough money to fulfill what that space needs. I see a lot of doctors that look at, they want to build these very lavish hospitals or very lavish practices, and they only have a finite amount of money from the lender to do that. So then it's about cutting corners and cutting back, and it's like you'd much rather have had those conversations prior to really falling in love with a space, to really know what is it that I can do here, and is this space going to meet what my vision is, right? And that's where I think, like you said, you bring in the architects, you bring in the equipment companies, and you really start formulating this team that can help bring that vision to life the right way and stage it the right way. That's great. So CARR does do a lot of work with associates that are going into first-time practice owner opportunities. So they're a dentist and they're saying, hey, I'm ready to hang a shingle and go find my space. But you also do a lot of work with like relocation. So if someone owns a business today, right, they're 3 years away from that first option, that their first 5 years is coming due. They have another 5-year option that they have to figure out if they're going to enact or not, or stage. Talk about how you work with those existing owners to help leverage their situation prior to signing for that second 5-year deal or extra deal that's in that lease contract, that initial lease.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the most common transaction in commercial real estate across the country, in every market, is the lease renewal. So it's somebody who's been in space, like think about a dentist or a veteran. I mean, somebody that's put in $200,000, $300,000 or more, whatever, into the build out, and they're thinking, I'm only been here 7 years or 5 years or 10 years. I'm not ready to leave. I haven't even really gotten the value out yet of the investment
Sure.
that I put in. I'm not leaving, and I just spent all this time in marketing and money and energy to get people to know where I'm at. I don't want to relocate just yet, and so, but I don't know if I'm getting a fair deal. So we do a lot of lease renewals, and we do a lot. The lease renewal is the most common real estate transaction. It's the people signing another 5 or 10 year term. And we run our renewals just like we do our relocation. So what we would do is our team will sit down, take a look at the lease that you have. We'll do a quick evaluation, see where your rate's at, see where the market's at. And typically, even if somebody doesn't want to relocate, we're going to do a quick search for a mile or two around just to make sure, hey, I want to know what the market is. So when we go to your landlord, we can say, hey, landlord, Dr. So-and-so has hired us to evaluate the market. They're looking at whether they renew this lease for another 5 years. I know they have an option in their lease to renew for another 5 or 10 years. They're looking at that, or should they relocate? And you and I both know, they're not in real estate, but you and I are in real estate, and you and I both know that after 10 years of annual escalations, they're here when the market's here. And so there's a delta there that we're trying to figure out if it makes sense for them to relocate, or if they should stay put. And so when you put it that way, and you kind of set the table that way, at that point, the landlord's like, hey, I don't want to lose this tenant. I know they have an option, but I want to do what I can to keep them. And many times we get tenant improvement allowance, we get some money to maybe freshen up the space, new carpet, new paint, new flooring, whatever it is. And we get lowered lease rates, market lease rates, maybe a month or 2, 3 months of free rent, depending on the term. So those lease renewals are a really big part of the business. And then relocations, like you mentioned, it's very similar to like all of our transactions. It's just taking a look at the market and making sure that we help them with doing the due diligence to see, would it make sense to move? Is it time to purchase? Maybe I've been leasing for 10 years and now I'm ready to own my building, or I want to buy land and construct my own building, or there's a great office condo or something like that.
Yeah, that happens a lot, I feel like, in the veterinary space where they start out in a lease space and then their business grows and usually grows pretty quickly. And then that second, they're in year 7 and then they're like, well, maybe it is time to go ahead and buy that building. One of the things that you said that I wanted to make sure our listeners key in on is don't lose your leverage, right? So don't tell your landlord that you have absolutely no aspirations of leaving. That's the last thing you should tell them. Even if you're friendly with your landlord, they should always think there's a risk that you could get up and go across the street at some point, because leverage is what really creates all of these other opportunities to monetize your lease before you go ahead and sign that second 5 years or maybe redo another 10-year lease. It really is about leverage at that point, right? You're creating leverage to help get them a better deal. And sometimes that better deal, I like what you said, sometimes it might just be a little money to freshen up the place, which is great. Talk a little bit about that part of it. For these existing owners, they could be leaving a lot of money on the table. I don't think they realize that when that lease renewal comes due.
Well, most of the time they don't know that that's a negotiation trigger point. I mean, they think I don't want to leave. I don't want to get kicked out. They feel like the power is all in the hands of the landlord, when in reality, the landlord is more concerned about losing a tenant, a blue chip tenant, very good, pays on time, low drama, no parking. They want to retain you as a tenant in their shopping center or building, and so most of the time, they're more concerned with that. And so all we're saying is make sure you take a look at the market. And to your earlier point, it's all about timing. If you go, the landlord's not going to tell you when your lease is up. They're going to tell you about 30 days out, maybe 15 days out. And they're going to say, hey, Dr. Johnson, your lease is up next month. I just want to make sure you're ready to sign your lease extension. Let us know or let us know if you're going to be vacating, because they know you can't move in 15
And at that moment, you have no leverage. When you're 30 days from a renewal, you have zero leverage because you have to stay at that point, because there's no way you could relocate in 3 weeks.
No,
it's just not going to happen. That's right.
Yeah, when is
the right time? So maybe I signed my first lease and it was either a 5-year or a 10-year. Let's use the 10-year as the analogy. What is the right time for me to engage with your team when I have a renewal coming due? Is that 2 years, 1 year, 6 months? Like, when is the optimal time to engage with CARR for my renewal?
So we say if you're looking at like a relocation and expansion, or even just a lease renewal, 12 to 18 months is the right time frame. If you know that, hey, I want to build a building, I'm looking at land, I would say 2 years out is probably a better mark, because the land is a longer process, more costly. There's more involved. Could be meetings with the county or the zoning committee or whatever. So there's just more lag time on the land side. But in terms of timeline, we would typically say about a year to 18 months out is prime, because at that point we can have the time to go to the market, talk with a couple landlords, see what they're offering, see if there are any other opportunities. And again, even if you don't want to relocate, it's good to take a look, because then we can use those as leverage when we go talk to your landlord and say, hey, we have the time, we have the options, and so now the ball's in your court. If you want to retain this tenant, you're going to have to sharpen the pencil and get us a better deal than we have in the lease as an option to renew. And if you don't, then obviously there is a real risk that the client's going to want to relocate.
Well, when I think about to our listeners today, when I think about you owners that maybe bought a practice or bought a veterinary hospital or bought a medical practice and it was a little dated, right? And your landlord is a third party, it's not the old owner. But you just kind of took over that lease. That happens a lot in that business, right? You're just kind of taking over the lease from the owner. And even if you get a new lease, like you probably didn't negotiate it really well, you had your attorney looking at it. When that first option comes due, after you've bought your hospital, like you said, you may be thinking, I'm never leaving this place. But before you go invest your own money or go get a loan from one of the banks to do a renovation, think about leveraging the lease a bit to get some of those funds to do that renovation to the space if you've been there. If the space has been there for 25 years, but you've only been there for 5, it probably does need some updating. Why not leverage that at that point? Or to your other point, check the lease rate to make sure that you're not overpaying. Because if you've been in a place for 10 or 15 years, the lease rates could, with your escalations, your lease could be way out of whack compared to other tenants that are even coming into the building new. That's fantastic advice. To shift gears on the advice side, what are 2 pieces of advice that you would give someone? Let's talk about an associate that is, the light bulb's going off for the first time. Ownership is becoming a more real reality for them. What's 2 pieces of advice from a real estate perspective that you would give a new potential owner?
I would say look at this as a business transaction. Don't put your property ahead of your practice. There are many times where especially the first the startup, they're thinking, I own my house, I don't want to rent, I don't want to lease, I want to build value, and it just makes sense to me to own. Your practice is the income generating piece here, right? Your property is good, and in time we can look at how you can maximize your profitability through your property and your real estate. But when you first get started, you really need to put your practice first, and you want money for marketing and working capital and the right equipment and the strategy you're going to employ to build up your practice. And you don't want to tie it all up into real estate. Now, there are many times where in some areas, maybe rural areas, or it all depends on the inventory, where a purchase may make sense. But I would just say, don't become emotional over the property. This is a business transaction. It's not your house. And so you need to approach this like a business transaction. So I would say, number one, don't put your property ahead of your practice. You need to do the opposite, because again, we've had many clients that were waiting for the perfect purchase opportunity to land and to present itself to them, and 2.5 years later they're still looking. And it's like, look at the opportunity cost.
Yeah, still an associate. That's right. They probably left hundreds of thousands of dollars of ownership income on the table by not pulling the trigger on a lease space versus waiting for that perfect purchase opportunity. That's really great advice. And then just switch gears. So then the existing owner, what advice would you give to them? I've been in my space for 7 years. I got maybe a renewal coming due. What should I be thinking about as an existing owner? What advice would you give them?
I would give them the advice of making sure that they are having the conversations with their CPA, with their attorney, and with a good healthcare specific tenant rep broker, whether it's CARR or somebody else. They need to be having the conversation with somebody to make sure that they are taking a look at the things like the opportunities in the market and not giving away their posture, like we mentioned earlier, making sure that they have the right strategy and game plan. Because again, with real estate being the second highest fixed expense, we were helping an OBGYN, a group practice. They were a large practice in Alabama a couple of years ago. We ended up saving them $1 million on their lease renewal. They didn't even relocate, just the lease renewal, because they had the right strategy in place. And so all that to say, there is so much money, whether you're in a 1,500 square foot space or a 10,000 square foot space. There's concessions, there's money, there are all kinds of things that can really mean a big difference to your bottom line if you have the right time and strategy and game plan. So I would lean on the team of advisors around you, and don't DIY this, whether you're doing a lease renewal, an expansion, a relocation, or even as a startup.
One of the highest, again, you said it earlier, and I want to reiterate, your lease or your monthly payments, when you look at that on an annual basis, it is typically the number 2 or number 3 or number 4 highest expense, especially if you're in an urban area. It's one of the highest expenses you have for your business, so treat it as such. Same way you would look at how you pay your people, same way you would look at your cost of goods sold, you should be reviewing your lease to make sure that you're not overpaying, and are there opportunities to help monetize that in any way, shape, or form. Great conversation. I could talk about this for hours. I think you guys do a fantastic job, and it's one of those things that I think does get overlooked, and really big mistakes can happen if you don't have someone really looking out for your best interests like CARR does. So we'll do the last gear shift, and really appreciate our conversation today. As you know, my company's name is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory. The name Wicklow is a county in Ireland that I aspire to live in and retire to someday. Many people laugh at that because I have very young children, so it's not happening anytime soon. But when I chose the name for the company, I'm helping my clients exit ownership in most cases, and they're either exiting to start their active retirement or they're funding their retirement so they can enjoy it later on in life. So I ask all of our guests, what's your Wicklow? What's your retirement dream there, Ken, that you can share with us?
Well, I was wondering, by the way, when I came on, because I saw the Ireland, and I was like, are we going to see like sheep in the background, like fields and pastures and all that in the background of the podcast? So my retirement dream, boy, that's a great question. We are in the throes like you are. We have 4 kids, and we are every night of the week going, like tonight, 3 different directions, my wife and I. And so we are a little ways off from that, but I will say I'm a big family guy. We love the outdoors. We love family. And so I think my retirement dream is probably getting into a spot where I'm able to be at all of the grandkids. I mean, I hope I have, dozens of grandkids or whatever, where I'm able to go see all their games and practices and recitals and all that kind of stuff, and be able to travel. And my wife and I love traveling. So, we're a minute away from that, but that is the goal.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sometimes it's hard to see it through the trees, right? But it'll be there someday, and a great story. I know you're a big family guy. Obviously, 4 kids is a lot. I have 2. I couldn't imagine 4. 2's enough for me.
I'll lend a couple of them to you if you want.
It sounds like you might need some help tonight because you're in one direction, your wife's in the other, and that 3rd kid is going to be like, who's taking me to my basketball tonight, right? So that's good. Well, listen, Ken, just a really great conversation. If any of our listeners want to get a hold of CARR, could you just give the website out so they can get to that? That would be great.
Absolutely. It's simple. It's just CARR.us. So Colin Carr is our founder, and so we just simplified it, CARR.us.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, if you have a need, if you are thinking about ownership opportunities and need a really good real estate company on your side to help you through and navigate these conversations, CARR is a fantastic option in your markets, and they are everywhere. They are in every 50 states. You can find a CARR agent. All of them are very professional, really understand the business, and really understand what it is you are trying to accomplish. So, Ken, again, thank you so much for coming on today. We really did learn a lot. I could speak to you for hours about real estate, but we're up on our time. So thank you again for joining. And thank you to all our listeners. Another episode of Industry Insiders in the books, and this was a great one. Don't sleep on your lease. Make sure you go ahead and get yourself paid and make the right choices when negotiating that. So thanks, Ken. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Bill.
You know, every time we speak, it's no apologies. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, presenting Industry Insiders, brought by Bill Murray. He help you in a real hurry. From ownership to healthcare, he an advocate, teaching you how to buy and sell practices. From CPAs to attorneys, all guests here to help you with your goals. You never know who's on next. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory. Let's go.